Hello, world history students. I'm sorry I can't be there today, but we're going to continue your notes with the Greek philosophers. Go ahead and take a minute to answer those past and present questions below. First past question should be, who fought each other in the Peloponnesian War? And the second present question is, what are the names of the three most famous Greek philosophers? If you think those names are Larry, Moe, and Curly, that is incorrect. Those are the Three Stooges. You probably don't even know who those are. I'm old. Anyway, let's go ahead and begin today with actually trying to understand what a Greek philosopher is. Of course, as we look at this, you can take the notes at your own pace. You can stop the video and come back to it whenever you need to. So, it says here a philosopher is someone who seeks to understand life. Really, everyone's trying to do this, but some people dedicate their entire lives to doing this. And so they're going to study and study and study, trying to understand every facet of life itself. And so they're going to look into music, math, and most importantly, logic. The idea of rational thinking, the way to try and make sense of what is going on around them. And once they think they've figured this out, it's only logical that they're going to use rhetoric to spread those ideas. Another vocab word, you're welcome. Rhetoric is all about trying to skillfully speak. And, of course, if you are a great philosopher, then you need that skill as well. Now, the important part about this idea of philosophy is that we take these ideas and they become the foundation of what we think of as science today. So, all those chemistries, biologies, astronomies, everything that we look at comes from the idea that we have to look at it logically, carefully, and then spread those ideas to others. So keep that in mind. I'm going to pause here. Once you're finished with this slide, go ahead and continue on. Our first philosopher is a man by the name of Socrates. Socrates was a very interesting individual. He really had quite the understanding. He started off as a stonemason, which is a guy who shapes stones. Not really a very exciting line of work. But in his meantime, in the past time that he has, he's going to go down to the agora and he's going to try and become a philosopher as well. And so he's going to collect these people around him who are his students, who he tries to teach, and most famously is his student Plato. Now Plato is going to write 30 different dialogues. A dialogue is this back and forth conversation between him and someone else. And they're trying to teach lessons and understand ideas. And most famously, this idea of the Socratic method, where every time that you ask a question, the answer is then also questioned. And that answer is also questioned. As you can imagine, this is very infuriating to the people of Athens. And so eventually, they're going to get so mad at him, he's going to upset so many people that they're going to put him on trial and condemn him to death. I think the official one was disturbing the peace or something like that. And he eventually is going to be forced to drink a cup of hemlock, as you can see in the picture below. He is still philosophizing even to the last second of drinking that hemlock, and he does perish from that. He takes it willingly, knowing that it is his will, it is his destiny. So as I said, Plato was his student, and Plato is not going to be very happy that this is going to happen to him. And so we're going to see that in this next slide. Go ahead and pause here and finish up this slide, and then continue on to the next. So here we have Plato. Plato decided, forget Athens, you guys messed up my teacher. He leaves Athens for 10 years and finally comes back, but still distrusts democracy. In fact, he is much more focused on an aristocracy than he ever thought about democracy. He decides to set up a school, not a school like Mercy. It's more like a classroom that people come in, they'll pay him a little bit of money, and then he teaches for a little bit, and then they all leave. Okay? It's a very different setup than what we're used to today. But he calls the school the Academy. Okay? And, boy, it just sounds so important, the Academy. But as he teaches these people, he gets his own ideas, and he decides to write these ideas down. And so he's going to write the book called The Republic. And in this Republic, he is going to set up an ideal state, the perfect state in which to create citizens, to create a government, to create an economy. And he believes that in this ideal state, we should have three separate classes: the workers, the soldiers, and the philosophers. Sorry, that philosopher is kind of cut off down there. The workers to make sure that things are being done, soldiers to make sure that people are protected, and philosophers to, you guessed it, be the rulers. He believes the philosophers are the most important people in the entire system. Also, if you really want to figure out a very fascinating idea about Plato, look up Plato's allegory of the cave. It is truly interesting to see the whole concept behind it, but we don't have enough time to get into it right now. Go ahead and pause here and finish up these notes and then continue on. Our third and last Greek philosopher was a man by the name of Aristotle. And he, of course, is going to study under, you guessed it, Plato. And he's also going to be the personal tutor of Alexander the Great, who we're going to talk about next week. So don't forget him. He starts his own school called the Lyceum, and here he is going to do much of the same stuff that Plato does, except even more so. He's going to learn even more ideas and study more concepts. As you can see, he's going to write a whole bunch of different books, including things like politics, physics, poetics. Really, I just picked out all the books that start with P to make it really easy for you to remember which ones it was. I really like this quote that's below. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. There is some food for thought. I always like that idea. We'll talk more about Aristotle once we get to Alexander the Great. But go ahead and finish up writing these notes down and then continue on. Let's get away from the philosophers. Philosophizing, boring. Let's get to the plays. I'm sure some of you are some theater geeks out there and love to go to the theater. So, drama, of course, becomes a huge deal in Greece. And they're going to be performed in these massive outdoor theaters, like you can see below. And most of these are going to be based on mythology, legends, heroes, all that kind of stuff. Right? Two of the most famous people that are going to write plays, one is focusing on tragedies, the other is focusing on comedies, and they are exactly what they sound like. Tragedy is how terrible life is, and it shows the meaning of life behind it, whereas comedy is always talking about how funny life is and making fun of other people. So Sophocles is the first one. He writes two separate tragedies. Oedipus, that talks about fate, and how Oedipus tries to avoid his fate, and in the end, no matter what he does, he always gets stuck doing the same thing. Versus Antigone, which is going to be the story about a woman who tries to do the moral thing, and instead gets in trouble through her civil duty. So she has to go against her king in order to do what's right with the gods. By doing that, the king ends up punishing her, putting her to death, but the king's son ends up falling in love with her, and so he tries to save her, but it's too late. She commits suicide, and therefore the king's son ends up committing suicide, and therefore the king's son, or the king's wife, also commits suicide. As you can kind of see here, it has become quite the tragedy. They really went overboard with that one. The second one is Aristophanes, and this is a comedy. It's supposed to be funny, okay? And it's called Lysistrata, about the women of Athens and the women of Sparta banding together to try and end this feud between Athens and Sparta. And it's supposed to be absolutely ridiculously hilarious, calling out public figures of men and doing all these weird scenes. At one point, the women are plotting to withhold any type of sexual pleasures from the men in order to get them to do whatever they want like stop this war. And it just goes on and on and on. They end up dumping water on old men while they're taking the treasury over. It's absolutely crazy. So these Greek playwrights are going to do a lot of writing, and there's going to be some amazing plays done during this time. As you can see, some are going to be happy, the smiling, joyous face down the bottom, and some are going to be quite sad. That's the almost frowning face. We had those two Greek masks that are kind of become the symbol for theater today. Our last slide that we're going to look at here is going to be over the historian. So if you haven't finished up this slide, go ahead and do so, and then we'll move on to our last one here. All right, our last slide is about Greek history. Oh boy, this is my favorite. Actually, I'm not going to lie. These historians are really, really basic. Okay? They really only learn about one type of history, one thing of history. The first guy, Herodotus, is going to be known as the father of history because nobody really cared to study about writing about past things before. He was the first one. And so he writes this book called The Histories, and he goes around and he interviews all these different people who were witnesses, and then he writes about them. But when he writes about them, he definitely has a biased opinion towards the Athenians and the Greeks. Every time that he writes, he always talks about the heroic Greeks and the awful Persians, which is probably the reason why most people look at this story as very focused on the Greeks. And there's a lot of things that were kind of extrapolated upon and didn't quite go to what we truly believe happened. But he did attempt, and he did try and find witnesses, and he did try and find actual facts in there as well. So it's kind of a combination. He tried his best, just short of it. Okay, really doing a great job with that. But he wrote about the Persian War. A few years later, we're going to see the next individual, Thucydides, and he's going to write instead about the Peloponnesian War. So we have the history of the Peloponnesian War. And here, he is going to try and do it whatever he can to avoid bias. Bias is this concept that you write from one side of things. And he tries to prevent that. He said even though he's Athenian, he's going to try and write it from both Athenian and Spartan viewpoints in order to make it a little more balanced. And so now we try and find that more so today in our histories, and he really influences that today. So we have a couple of Greek historians that really start this process of writing things down from the past in order to share it with the future generations. No wonder why I like these guys. With this, our notes are done for the day, and therefore that means you have the rest of the time to work on your cards, which are still due Monday. So please make sure you finish those over the weekend. Make sure you have your works cited, all 6 in MLA format, 2 for each of your topics. Make sure that you have your cards done and ready to turn in on Monday, so that way we can use them later in the week. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and God bless.